Hello there, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com. You know, one of the biggest problems we record collectors have, and you'll have too, I'm sure, is that there are wonderful compilations and collections out there that you just won't find because they have multiple composers, multiple artists, and it's virtually impossible to locate them or to even know that they exist because who's going to tell you about them? I mean, back in the days of record stores, remember record stores? You know, there was always that collection section that just had piles and piles of stuff you just throw in there. You never knew what it was. And it was almost impossible to find the one item that you may have wanted amongst these collections. And with compact discs, things have even gotten worse because they're longer, so you can put more stuff on them, and they vanish completely. Online and for the sort of digital media, sometimes you can find individual tracks. In that sense, it's helpful. But even that's a fairly recent thing. I have to tell you a story. It was absolutely amazing. Back in the day, when we were setting up ClassicsToday.com, we were always looking for partnerships with online resources, and one of them was with a major search engine who shall remain nameless, but it was with a major search engine, and they were looking to merchandise stuff. They wanted to sell recordings, and so they came to us, and they asked us if we would provide content, and their deal was, they would give us credit for it. Of course, they wouldn't pay for anything. God forbid they should spend a nickel. And we were sort of about it, but we said, okay, we'll see if we can work it out. Well, in order to do this, we had to be able to send our content to them, which required just endless quantities of programming and IT people and stuff. It was going to be very expensive, so we said to them that they had to do it at their end. We would send them the content, but how they dealt with it was their problem. Well, needless to say, they had never heard of classical music before. These were a bunch of people out in California somewhere. Naturally, they were all in Silicon Valley, sitting around, it seems, a conference room. We were always on speakerphones with like all these voices popping in from different places. And we said to, and they said to us, they said, this is the format we need. We need album title, artist, label. And we said to them, no, classical music doesn't work that way. Classical music is composer, works, artists, and within artists, it was either soloists if it was soloists, or ensemble if it was ensemble. If it was a conductor, it was, it was ensemble and then conductor, or conductor, ensemble, soloists, and then the label, catalog information. And they're like, no, we don't do it that way. We're not set up to do it that way. I said, but that's how it has to be with classical music. And they said, oh, can you prove it? And I said, can you read? Go get a classical music magazine. Go look it up. You'll see that's how it's listed. That's what an album note header is. So they did some research and they came back to us and said, okay, we'll have to work it out with our IT people. So wait a moment, wait a little while, and we'll work on it. So they disappeared for like 3 months, right? And finally, they get back to us and they say, okay, we think we're ready. We'd like a sample of a typical classical music disc that has the kind of heading that you're talking about. So I said, okay, you think you know what you're doing? Here it comes, guys. I sent them as a sample Toscanini's the reopening of La Scala concert. I mean, you only had one orchestra and one conductor, right? But about 20 different composers and 24 soloists. It was the header was like that long, right? So we loaded all up in our fabulous whatever thing, in the queue, and we pushed the send button, and it goes flying out to California. And then there's silence, total dead silence. This was like in November. So December passes, January, February. Finally, in March, we get a note that they would like to speak to us. They are deigning to speak to us again, right? And I said to them, what happened? Where were you? Well, we got your thing and it blew up our entire system and we had to reprogram the whole thing again. So they did. And finally, they got it working so that we could submit to them classical music recording information. Now, mind you, this was not compilations. That's where this conversation started, remember? This was single discs. We started with single discs because we didn't want to dare send another compilation, right? This was single composers, single orchestra, single conductor, right? Well, they were able to accept that. The problem, however, was that on their page, they could only list it alphabetically by composer first names. So Beethoven was under L. Mozart was under W. I mean, this was just fabulously wonderful and easy for people to navigate, right? I mean, it was great. I said, how are you going to sell records if people are looking for, they want Mozart and they have to look under W? I said, you people are out of your mind. Anyway, we sent them stuff. I don't know what they did with it, but it just goes to show the world is not set up to handle classical music recordings, and compilations are just, the icing on the cake of difficulty. All of which is a lengthy but I hope amusing prelude to this disc. It's simply called Italian Orchestral Music. That's all it's called. It's on Australian Eloquence, another wonderful, wonderful, wonderful product coming from Australian Eloquence. The only part of Universal Music that seems to know what to do with its back catalog is Australian Eloquence. And wait till you hear what's on it. It's fabulous. These are recordings from 1957 and 1960. The first features the Orchestra dell'Accademia Nazionale di Santa Cecilia with Fernando Previtali. Remember him? He did opera recordings with like Renata Tebaldi and things like that, these are conductors who no one paid much attention to, but they were wonderful, some of them. You get Alfredo Casella's La Giara, which means the jar. Isn't that helpful? Symphonic Suite, The Pines of Rome, and a very, very good one, a really good one, especially given the date. And you get Ghedini's Quattro Pezzi di Girolamo Frescobaldi, 4 Frescobaldi arrangements, which are just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And finally, Goffredo Petrassi's Concerto No. 1 for orchestra, which is also a marvelous work if you don't know it. Let me talk a little bit about these pieces because they're fabulous. They're fabulous, and you're not going to find them so easily. Now, Casella is a major, major composer whose music has been getting a lot of attention from Chandos and Naxos lately. And don't worry, we're going to cover it. We're going to get there. But his suite from La Giara is absolutely wonderful. And the second movement, if you haven't heard it, is basically a tarantella arrangement of Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. The part that goes chunk, 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 that thing. And it's great. It's absolutely great. The Ghedini I mentioned, the Frescobaldi arrangements, which are so sensitively done and beautiful. Petrassi is an interesting composer. He wrote a whole series of concerti for orchestra. They get gnarlier and gnarlier and more avant-garde as they progress. But the first it's still a challenging piece, but it's in the style of that sort of neoclassical Hindemith, like Hindemith's concerto for orchestra, actually, or Honegger, kind of. It's motoric and rhythmically very vigorous, but still quite listenable in a good way, meaning it's challenging but exciting and very bracing and colorful. Terrific piece, really a terrific piece. Then the rest of this compilation is conducted by Nello Santi. Remember him? Nello Santi was the house conductor for the Italian repertoire at the Metropolitan Opera for years and years and years and years in the 60s and 70s. And he was an always reliable, decent conductor. And here he does an entire collection of overtures and intermezzi by Wolf-Ferrari, which, are wonderful. Now, we all know the overture to The Secret of Susanna, but the real fun is the suite from The Jewels of the Madonna, Il Gioielli della Madonna, the suite. It ends with a Neapolitan dance that's just a hoot. It really is crazy. And this is with the fabulous, always wonderful Orchestral de la Société des Concerts du Conservatoire. Oh, I love them. The Paris Conservatory Orchestra from 1960, when they were absolutely at their peak. The performances are wonderful. But how would you ever know about this? where would you find it? Who would know to look for Previtali or Nello Santi or for any of these works? I mean, The Pines of Rome is the only thing anyone's ever heard of. It's really a shame. So I'm telling you about it now. If you can find it, if it still exists, who knows? But these were Decca recordings. They're on Australian Eloquence. They're very inexpensive. They were well recorded in their day. It's that vintage early Decca stereo sound. It sounds just great. It's a terrific, first-class collection of rarities, real rarities, and a compilation that I mean, it's amazing that it even exists, that they were able to release it. So do look for it and plug a lot of gaps in your collection with it. It's really something to keep on listening to. Thank you. Take care.